Welcome to Season 1 of Garth and Sue Talk, a new series by Psych Sessions, where we bring up a topic of conversation and then we just riff. These are the water cooler conversations that you have with colleagues in your department. These are the chats you might have at the bar after a good day at a teaching conference. So, please pull up a seat as we talk about teaching.
What are we talking about?
Well, Sue, that's a good question. We could go a lot of different directions. I was brainstorming last week, as you know, and came up with a lot of topics. But one that is just kind of next in queue in my brainstorming list was learning science. So when's the first time you heard that there was a science for learning?
Boy, I don't know, 5-10 years ago, maybe.
Yeah, me too. It took off. And do you know, did it all come out of cognitive psych? That's where I think it came out of.
Yeah, that's ultimately what it is cognitive psychology. And I think learningscientists.org, I think both of them are cognitive psychologists.
Interesting. Yeah, and I know that we've both been using their resources. They were one of the really, I'm sure there are other resources out there, but they really did a great job of it. Can you want to tell us how you've used learning scientists resources at your institution?
The biggest thing that we've used are the posters. And you can download posters for free from their website, learningscientists.org. Just click on downloads. And there are 6 study posters. And we had our print shop blow them up into big poster size and laminated them and stuck them in our classroom building, which nobody has been in since March.
Yeah, I remember just walking around the hallways of Highline. I think this happened either right as I was departing or maybe right before, and it was great. When you put learning science onto the walls of the buildings and where students are walking by all the time, it definitely does shape those classes that are going to be meeting in that building, don't you think?
I assume so. I think my hope was that as students were just standing outside waiting to go into class, that they would look away from their phones long enough to look at the walls and see what's there. Sort of some stealthy, here's a little learning science for you. Yeah.
And I have found that those posters and that work is very helpful to students. So I create assignments around that work and some other stuff. But also to our faculty colleagues outside of our discipline, what is your experience of, and you don't have to talk about Highlines specifically, but of the knowledge of learning science outside of teaching of psychology?
Some areas more than others. The physicists have done a lot of work around teaching and learning. Other disciplines, not quite so much. So it's largely been, I think, individual faculty who have been trying to figure out, how do I help my students study? And I know that when I started teaching, I had no idea. It was one of those unconscious competence things. A lot of us who are in academics, we did well in school. That's how we ended up here. But I don't know how many of us were really conscious about what it was that we were doing. I know that I self-tested, because in my mind, that's what studying is. And how I came to that, I don't know. But I remember very clearly that it was in high school where I really learned that that's how you study. But I don't know that I could have put my finger on it. So when I started teaching and I had students who weren't doing well, I was really at a loss as to how to help them. Oh, you're studying. So in my mind, if a student is studying, it means that they're self-testing. And I didn't know enough to ask, well, how are you studying? So years later, I started asking that question. And sometimes the response is, I don't know, I'm just studying. Mm-hmm. No, okay, so when you sit down to study. Tell me what you're doing. Well, I read the textbook, and then I reread the textbook.
I highlight some things in the textbook.
And I highlight some stuff in the textbook.
With different colors, obviously.
Right. Different colors. Yeah. Yellow, green, and blue, ideally.
Oh, this is bringing back so many memories for me because that was me. And I was one worse. Or I don't know if it's one worse, but it's just not good. My strategies for studying were rewrite all of my notes and then to a manageable few pages, or 5 or 6 or 8 or 10 pages, write out everything. So that's probably good in some ways, maybe. But then just rote memorize everything. And that can get you surprisingly far. But what kills me is I was putting in the time in some ways, but it wasn't super effective. I don't think I learned a lot, which I think we can safely say now with learning science.
Yeah, I've always thought that you never learned very much.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, so let's see. Where else do we get learning science? I think probably teaching in learning centers all over the country. It's kind of infused its way into those places. So I do see it come up there, along with other things that have become popular. Hopefully, the truth about learning styles, which is that they're not a thing. And we've also seen growth mindset kind of come in a similar way. I would say that learning science has. Those things kind of all grew together. Metacognition is another one that came in. I don't know why I'm going through these, but it just seemed like there was a revolution in the last decade about how we learn.
Yeah, I think that's certainly the case. Interestingly, I wish I had some actual data on this, and I don't, but it's never stopped me before from making assertions. But a lot of people who lead up teaching and learning centers are psychologists. I can think of 3 off the top of my head. Mm-hmm. So I think they're pushing the conversation some. And I like to think that they got into it because they got tired of attending workshops where they were told about things like learning styles and maybe the Myers-Briggs, because that's a classic. Yeah. So I think you're absolutely right. I think that the conversation has certainly been elevated. We've seen some wonderful books come on the market, like Make It Stick, that is all about learning science, written for a popular audience. I would love to see more learning science embedded in the intro psych textbooks, in the intro psych course. Is starting to get there. I think a number of instructors will talk about it in the context of the memory chapter, for instance. I know that's where I cover it. I actually have my students look at those learningscientists.org posters, and I have an assignment built around that regarding the memory model as it's presented in their chapter to get them to think more deeply about, well, why do these techniques work? Now, whether or not somebody's actually going to adopt the techniques, that's a whole different thing, because you're absolutely right that rote memorization has worked for so many students for so long. It's difficult to move away from that to something that requires more effort.
Yeah. It's interestingly, and we've talked about this before, you bring those things up probably mid-term, right? The learning science stuff. I definitely revisit it in kind of midterm-ish, but I do it in the first week or 2 of class. I really hit it hard. Have you considered that? I want to know, like, what, and there's probably not a right way to do it, but what led you to kind of put it there versus kicking off with it?
The reason I've got it in the middle is because the memory chapter is often in the middle of intro psych textbooks.
Yeah.
Now, let me go ahead and justify its location there. For many students, telling them about different ways to study in the first couple weeks isn't going to be meaningful for them because they haven't failed yet.
Yeah.
So after they fail a test, then it's like, oh, I do need to do something different. Maybe there's something different that I can do. Now, having said that, I don't know how much of an impact it has on students as a whole, but maybe to me, it is just like, it's just like we know what it means to eat well. We know we should be getting more exercise than what we're getting. And we have heard this from our doctors. They've been very clear about it. But doing it is a whole different thing. And I think that same experience is true for students. We can stand in the authoritative role and say, this is how you should do it. But for a student to actually make that change, and it's a significant change, and it's a risky change. I know this other way of studying has worked for me, at least in the short term, in some classes. So is it going to work? And am I willing to risk it? So I guess there's those two components, but ultimately it comes down to, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink.
Right. Yeah. Well, and students have to be prepared with the reality of, you try these new things out, they may not, well, in fact, they probably won't work as well right away because, and this is Chu's videos on YouTube, which I'm sure many people are already aware of, but there's this point in maybe the first or second video where he just says, it's hard. Learning is hard work. And I sometimes tell students that, if you're not working, you're not learning. It's just part of the deal. Where rote memorization, for me, it was work, but it wasn't hard. It wasn't hard work. It just wasn't hard mental work as far as thinking critically. It was tedious. Yeah. Different kind of difficult. Yeah. So, do you think that we should be teaching, hold on, I'm going to switch my question up. If students don't get this in our psychology courses, and let's talk Gen Psych, where are they going to get this information? That's kind of my fear of not covering it there.
I think you're absolutely right. I think it's our responsibility, specifically in intro psych, to cover it there. Students at least have to know what the good techniques are and why they work. If they're ever going to make a change, that's the first thing. It's like, you have to know what good nutrition is. You have to know what good exercise means. You got to know that first before you ever make the step to actually doing it. So I'm okay in intro psych with introducing these concepts to students inside the framework of, this is what we know about memory, for instance, and this is why these techniques work. Time-honored, proven, experimental research, these techniques work. Then, for some students, yeah, it's going to sit in the back of their brains and it's going to percolate there, and then maybe by their second year of college or their third year of college that they're like, maybe I should go back and revisit that, and maybe there is something to that. Yeah.
Other resources out there, in case somebody hasn't heard of these, we've mentioned Make It Stick and the Learning Scientists work, the Stephen Chu's videos on YouTube. One of my favorite documents is the PDF What Works, What Doesn't by Dunlowski and colleagues. And I find that one super helpful to students, but also helpful to me. And one of the things I've learned about learning science is that, and I think they call them the gold star standards. They come up with 2 or 3 that are, that are the best in the literature, across the literature. They're the best techniques for learning. And I love taking those 2 or 3, so retrieval practice, space practice, and just starting to organize my course according to those. We don't have to implement all of them. You can take the best ones, work them into your course design, and give students that learning experience. Yeah, so I don't know, maybe you could speak to how do you think about that? Oh, the other thing I was going to say is that you can tell students what you're doing as well. So be transparent about it. What do you think?
I think that's a great idea. We know we know the value of space practice. We know the value of retrieval practice, but to what extent do we actually have it built into our courses? I do know one instructor who the very first exam is based on the first couple chapters. The second exam is based on the first 4 chapters. The next exam is based on the first 6 chapters. So students are getting lots of retrieval practice, and it is spaced out. So by the end of the course, they're going to know the stuff from the beginning of the course really well, the stuff at the end of the course less well, but they'll still know it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's one of the reasons why I like interteaching, which you and I both use and we talk about a lot, which is, well, why don't you finish the sentence for me? Why do we like interteaching from this learning, this retrieval practice, space practice perspective?
When you're asking questions that you're asking students to answer, you can pull in all kinds of content from earlier in the course. It is all absolutely fair game. One of the challenges with multiple choice tests, and by their very nature test banks, is that they tend not to cross chapters. It tends to be, here's a question from chapter 1, here's a question from chapter 2, questions for chapter 3. But with this interteaching method that we use, we're asking students to respond to questions. And these are essay questions. And if we want, we can include content from earlier in the course. We get to the sleep chapter, and here's a question about correlations. Remember correlations from back in chapter 1?
Yep. Yeah, there is so much opportunity to do that. The AP reading, the free response questions have been kind of inspiring to me in that way, because that's what they do. They take content and concepts across the entire course and deliver them to students. And that can be done on a weekly basis, and checking in particularly on content that students struggle with most. So I default to cognitive dissonance all the time, because my students have trouble even just with the first study about cognitive dissonance that's in every book, right? And but if I attack cognitive dissonance and I'm really going for that for my students and I assess it this week, I also want to check back on that in 2 weeks or 3 weeks, because not all intro psych content is equal in terms of ease of students learning it.
Yeah, that's the truth.
Yeah. Right. So yeah, anything else that we missed on our quick conversation and overview of learning science? What do you think?
I also think that as psychologists, we have a responsibility to the rest of our institutions to inform our faculty about what the learning science is. I think that we should step up with our own workshops and with some very concrete tips on here's study techniques, here's how we know that they work, here are ways that you can incorporate them into your courses. And for students, I know that some psychology faculty will hold workshops for students. Come to this workshop and we will tell you how to study.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I was in a faculty meeting this week, and we are coming into a crazy political season right now, or are in it, I think. Somebody was talking about how we shouldn't be afraid to visit this in our classes, and one of the political scientists, or somebody maybe who wasn't in political science, said, "Hey, let's lean on our political scientists. This is their area. Let's let them kind of educate us about it." Everybody's an armchair political expert right now, just like everybody's a armchair psychologist. But I do like taking on this responsibility on behalf of our institutions to humbly give away what we know about learning science, and I think that's what you're saying.
I love that. Humbly give away.
Yeah. Well, why don't we end on that note, and we'll do this again in a I don't know, few days, few hours, few weeks.
Yeah, sounds good.
Thanks, Sue.
Thank you, Garth.